I'm curious, how does bipartisanship play a part in restoring civility?
I mentioned earlier that, if you were a Democrat in the Reagan era, when Ronald Reagan was president, and the real resurgence of the modern Republican Party, um, you know, you may disagree with his approach or the tax rate that he wanted to set or a particular policy that he was pursuing. But I kind of feel like overall, we saw ourselves as being on the same team as Americans. He came of age in the Bill Clinton administration as a Republican, and he's a Democrat. Very much the same thing. You may or may not like him. You may not like this or that policy or program that he's promoting. But overall, you are working in the same direction, Democrats and Republicans. Um, what we have now, um, and a host of examples of bipartisanship, right? You look at in the Bill Clinton era, probably something that a number of people are rethinking now who are still in politics, but bipartisan work on welfare reform, bipartisan work on the crime bill. And perhaps many of us, myself included, would not have necessarily been supportive of those efforts, but they were examples of bipartisan cooperation, where each side starts with their ideal, recognizes they probably won't be able to achieve it, find a consensus position through compromise, and then are ultimately able to get that through. When I was in Congress for 6 years, from 2013 to 2019, I sat on the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Armed Services Committee. And these were really, as the country got more contentious, and certainly that contention was evident in Congress, these were the last bastions of bipartisanship where you really weren't voting along party lines. You were finding common ground with folks, regardless of party affiliation or the part of the country that they came from or the letter next to their name, because you were helping, we would argue, some of the most important fellow Americans we could, those who put their lives on the line for this country. And we wanted to make sure that we took care of them. And I remember in the Donald Trump administration introducing a bill to address mental health care needs for returning veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a Democrat in the minority at that time, Democrats didn't have a majority, there's no way I was going to be able to get that thing passed unless I found a Republican counterpart with whom I could work. And I did. And that colleague didn't necessarily like everything in my bill. We negotiated something that satisfied some of his concerns while maintaining the thrust of my proposal. We each made our case, Republican and Democrat, to our colleagues in Congress, and passed it overwhelmingly in the House, passed it in the Senate, and Donald Trump signed that into law. And look, I probably disagree with Donald Trump on many a thing, but even with Donald Trump, I was able to find some common ground. So even in this period, in this moment, there's still a way to get it done. And I know it's going to be tough, but I think there is still hope for bipartisanship on some of the most important issues, whether it is the economy, the ability to find a job, the ability to afford to go to college and seek higher education, climate, you name it. These super big things that we've got to do. It's going to be a lot easier to do them if we can find some bipartisanship in getting that legislation passed.
I'm curious, and again, I don't want to go too far down a path of discussing one party versus another, but there seems to be a lot of truly polar opposite points of view in our current society. So really two questions is how often are people able to have a similar situation where they can find a colleague on the other side, and how, if that's not happening as often, at what point will we need to look at maybe a middle ground with a third party? I know, it's been a two-party system, and that third party seems to be a true minority. But at what point do you think that bipartisanship is going to meet in the middle?
That's a really good question, and it's the marketplace of democracy, right? If there is not a candidate or a platform or a party that satisfies my needs or the things that I want to see for this country. And if someone's offering an alternative, a third party or an independent candidate, then I might be drawn to that person. And this may be one of those moments for many of our fellow Americans, for many of our fellow Texans, where one party or the other doesn't necessarily represent their interests. I don't know that you've seen, Courtney, this wide a divergence of the two parties. I think for much of modern American history, at least, the Democratic Party is center left, the Republican Party is center right, with some significant amount of overlap. But right now, there's seemingly, and I'm no longer in office and not a candidate and not as plugged in, but as a citizen looking at those in elected positions, it seems like there's no overlap, and probably there are exceptions, and very divergent views on almost every fundamental issue that I can think of, and including those that I just named earlier. So does that provide an opening for a third party or an independent candidate in a given race for city council or Congress or for the presidency? I don't know, but it may very well. And I do think you have, in both parties, almost a reorganizing after the 2020 election, and certainly within the Republican Party, the outsized influence of President Trump, even now out of office, on those currently in office. There's really an alignment around him as a personality and as a power in that party. What do disaffected Republicans who don't fall in that camp do? Do they start another party? I don't know, but that's another possible scenario.